Hey everyone, it's Mr. Miles. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the lesson for today, Monday, March the 27th. Okay, so this is James Russell Lowell, who is the last fireside poet that we are going to read and analyze today. So, real simple for today. You do the same thing that we did pretty much all of last week, which is read the poem. You'll get a paper copy of this poem here. You'll analyze it, annotate it, mark it up, and you are going to then complete this poetry analysis chart and turn it in by the end of the day. Okay. So let's talk about James Russell Lowell and the first Snowfall. Okay. So the first Snowfall, if you look at the title, that automatically kind of clues us in as to something about this poem. First off, it's going to be talking about snow. It's going to be talking about winter, the first snowfall. So the first implies that it's the first snowfall, whatever. No, probably not. Probably the first snowfall of winter, maybe. So you could be thinking about the title as you read because the title is very significant. Okay. Um, and then the first thing that you're going to do is we're going to read the whole poem together out loud, and you just follow along, do the same thing that we did last week. Mark any words that you don't know or sentences or lines that stand out to you. Words, circle any words that maybe you want to come back to because you think they're maybe kind of important, they kind of stand out to you. And then we'll come back to that. Okay. So this is the first Snowfall by James Russell Lowell. The snow had begun in the gloaming, and busily all the night had been heaping field and highway with a silence deep and white. So as I read, I'm going to be doing what you are going to be doing, which is highlighting or circling any words I either don't know or want to come back to. Every pine and fir and hemlock wore ermine too dear for an earl, and the poorest twig on the elm tree was ridged each inch deep with pearl. From sheds new roofed with carrara came Chanticleer's muffled crow. The stiff rails were softened to swan's down and still fluttered in the snow. I stood and watched by the window the noiseless work of the sky and the sudden flurries of the snowbirds like brown leaves whirling by. I thought of a mound in sweet Auburn where little headstones stood, how the flakes were falling it gently, as did robins the babes in the wood. And up spoke our own little Mabel, saying, "Father, who makes it snow?" And I told her of the good All-Father who cares for us here below. And again I looked at the snowfall, and I thought of the leaden sky that arched over our first great sorrow when that mound was heaped so high. And I remembered the gradual patience that fell from that cloud like snow, flake by flake, healing and hiding the scar that renewed our woe. And again to the child I whispered, the snow that husheth all, darling, merciful Father alone can make it fall. And then with eyes that saw not, I kissed her, and she kissing back could not know that my kiss was given to the sister folded close under deepening snow. And so I am going to highlight all that because that's important. We're going to come back to it. All right. So first thing to do before we dive into the actual content, we're going to look at the meter and try to see if there's any rhyme scheme meter going on here. So first off, let's take a look at the rhyme scheme. The snow had begun in the gloaming. A, busily all the night. B, heaping in the field and highway. C, silence deep and white. B. So A, B, C, B, lock, earl, tree, pearl, A, B, C, B. So A, B, C, B is the rhyme scheme that follows through most of the poem. Okay. Now let's look at the meter. Okay. The snow had begun in the gloaming, so 9, and busily all the night, 7, had been heaping field and highway, 8, with a silence deep and white, 7. So the meter seems fairly inconsistent. Every pine and fir and hemlock were ermine too dear for an earl, and the poorest twig on the elm tree was ridged inch deep with pearl. So it seems to me like the first and third lines of every stanza uh, exist in some variation of 8 or 9 syllables, um, depending on the pronunciation of certain words. But pretty consistently, the second and fourth lines of every stanza are consistently 7 syllables. And that's important. And that's going to be something that I'm going to focus on because the second and fourth stanzas might tell me something particularly important. Why is that? Well, because the second and fourth stanzas are the only ones that, or the second and fourth lines are the only ones that rhyme, right? So already those second and fourth lines are going to be standing out to us because they're the only ones that rhyme with each other. But also, they're the only lines that have that consistent 7 syllable right? And like I said, the first and third, they have some variation of 8 or 9 syllables. Here, it's 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. Okay. And so it's going to make those second and fourth lines important to us as we read and look into it. Okay. Busily all the night. Well, what's busy? The snow. Silence deep and white. Silence. Okay. So silence. Something tells me that silence is going to be more important as I continue reading. Okay. Um, so now looking at the actual kind of content of the poem, you look at the first stanza. Obviously, starts off with an image, and the image is just very simply the snow is falling down um, on the field, on the highway. It's just a long snowfall. Okay, but when it comes to the romantics and the fireside poets, we know that if you see an image, whether it be of a nautilus or of a ship or of a snowfall, the poem is never going to be about just that thing. It's going to be about something on a figurative level as well, or on a deeper level. Okay. So every pine and fir and hemlock were ermine too dear for an earl. Okay. So I imagine that many of you might kind of like want to say, like, oh, what's ermine? What is that? So ermine is a type of stoat or a weasel or whatever, and it's often used for furs, okay, like fur collars and things like that. And so the ermine is like the white fur trim around like a coat, and an earl would be like a nobleman, like somebody who would be rich enough to afford that kind of very rare kind of white fur trim. Um, and so he's being metaphorical here. He's saying that the pine trees and the hemlocks and the firs, they're all wearing this beautiful white fur trim, which is not literal fur. It's the white snow that kind of lines the branches and the trees and the bushes, right? And so that's what he's talking about there. From sheds new roofed with carrara, which is a type of um, substance you use to roof with, came the chanticleer. Chanticleer is a type of rooster, muffled crow. So we're evoking the image of a barn, of a farm. Like, you've got the rooster crowing. You're roofing the sheds, like whether it be barns or tool sheds or whatever the sheds are. And the stiff rails are softened to swan's down and still fluttering in the snow. I. So now the speaker comes, okay? And we get to actually have a little bit of dialogue in this poem. So we learn a little bit about who the speaker is in this poem. I stood by and watched by the window the noiseless work of the sky. And there's that word again, noiseless. Okay? So in the first stanza, there was silence. Okay? And here, noiseless. So we're getting a theme, right? We're getting a pattern of silence, of quiet. Okay? And the sudden flurries of the snowbirds like brown leaves whirling by. I, back to the speaker, thought of a mound in Sweet Auburn. Well, do we know who or what Sweet Auburn is? Not really. Let's keep reading. Where a little headstone stood. Okay? Look at those two words back to back. Little headstone. Okay? So headstone, obviously referring to a grave, tombstone. But why call it little? Most headstones aren't little, right? Most headstones are pretty consistently sized, right? They're about, probably the size of a man's torso, I guess. What has a little headstone? Children, babies do, right? And how the flakes were folding it gently as the robins, the babes in the wood. And so here we can kind of go ahead and put two and two together here. Why is he thinking of a tiny little headstone? Well, he's thinking of a little child who died. And if he's thinking about a little child who died, he's probably thinking about his own little child who died. And then he's all of a sudden kind of interrupted from his thoughts by little Mabel, who we can probably infer is the sister. Up spoke our own little Mabel, saying, "Father, who makes it snow?" And I told of the good All-Father who cares for us below. And so here you have an interesting point where the living sister asks her dad, who makes it snow? And obviously her dad is still thinking about the dead child, the one who passed away. And so now he's saying, oh, well, the good All-Father, God takes care of us down here, right? And so you've got this tension between the father who is kind of grieving and thinking about his dead daughter, but also trying to instill the values into his living daughter that, yes, we don't control what happens down here on earth. God is looking out for us and God is going to take care of us, even though not everything in life is pretty and, we're going to deal with loss and suffering and pain. And again, I look at the snowfall and I thought of the leaden sky. Leaden, in other words, like lead, the color of lead, right? And the color of lead is obviously gray. It's dark, it's dull. That arched o'er our first great sorrow when that mound was heaped so high. So it's pretty clear now, yes, it was his daughter who passed away. I remembered the gradual patience that fell from that cloud like snow, flake by flake, healing and hiding the scar that renewed our woe. Now he's not talking about literal snow. Now he's talking about something falling down like flakes from the sky, patience. And when he says patience, he doesn't mean like, the patience that I have to have when I'm like going to the dentist or I'm going to the DMV to get my driver's license renewed. He's talking about patience, in other words, like endurance, right? Like I am having to endure the loss of my daughter and having to cope and process and understand it. And obviously that pain never goes away. He still is here, this snowfall, looking out into the horizon, thinking about his daughter. This pain has not gone away, which is why he uses that word, the scar, right? If you get injured, right, you get cut, the cut heals, but there is still a scar that reminds you of that pain. And so when he looks out into the sky and he sees the snowflakes falling and falling and falling, what does that remind him of? His daughter. Because of that burial and that headstone with the first snowfall coming down around it. So for him, the snowfall is like a scar that you get when you rip your skin open. It heals. The snow heals. It comforts him because he knows that his daughter is in a better place. but it also reminds him of that pain and that loss. And again to the child I whispered, the snow that husheth all, darling, merciful Father alone can make it fall. And so he's still giving his daughter this optimistic worldview, this optimistic, like, hey, it's going to be okay. God's looking out for us. No matter what happens, God's looking out. And then with eyes that saw not, I kissed her. And she kissing back could not know that it was my kiss given to her sister, folded close under deepening snow. So here, he kisses the living daughter, but in reality, he's kissing the daughter who's under all that snow out there. He's kissing her vicariously through his living daughter because he misses her and he wants to connect to her in some way. And the snow, looking out onto that field covered in snow, connects him to that dead daughter in a way. And so he's talking to Mabel and he's kissing Mabel, but he's thinking of that deceased daughter because that snow is just bringing back those memories all over again. And so, that's the gist of the first Snowfall. And so when you go back and you analyze it according to everything in this chart, be thinking about those themes, be thinking about the themes of loss and of grief and of love, but also of, it's a very Christian poem in a way. It's a type of poem that's called an elegy, an Elegy, which is a poem that is written to mourn somebody. It is a poem that is written to grieve the loss of someone who has passed away. And, a lot of times when you go to a funeral, right, like the pastor, whoever is giving the eulogy, will say things like, we are not here to be sad because so-and-so wouldn't want us to be sad. We are here to celebrate their life, right? And in a weird way, Lowell's kind of taking a similar tone here. Like he could be upset at God. He could be angry at God for taking away his daughter that he clearly loves so much. But he's not angry at God. He's saying God's got us. God's watching over us. God's making it snow. And in a weird way, it's almost like he's saying God's doing me a favor by making it snow to remind me of my daughter who passed away, to make me feel those memories. And yes, even that pain again, because she's still there in my memory and the snow jogs all those memories back. And so it is a very religiously informed poem here, with the snow symbolizing a lot of things, grief and loss, but also love, also God and patience and endurance. And so there's a lot going on here in this poem, but that's kind of the overall gist of what Lowell's doing here. So break it down, like I said, on your own, and then do this chart and turn it in before you leave class today. So that's the lesson for Monday, March the 27th.